So today's webinar is going to be a better way to create spaces and views with the MEPP3. So if any of you guys don't have the MEPP3 and you have some questions or comments about it, feel free to inquire. There'll be a phone number and everything like that, as well as you'll have my information to reach out to me to inquire about it. The MEPP3 is a tool that was built by CTC, and basically what it gives you guys the ability to do is it gives you the ability, especially if you're converted from like CAD to Revit and stuff like that, it gives you a lot of your standards fully created and ready to go. So we see it utilized in design and in construction and VDC. So gets you guys started with standards, but it also gives you a full library of content, library of families, shared parameter file that's already created, and tons of other options like more integrated families, families that are connecting with schedules, and the ability to add additional schedules and everything along those lines. And then allows you to set up a project. So that's what we're going to go through today. Is going to be the just some of the basic project setup information on this, and what the MEPP3 starter project can offer you and your company on starting up a project, and specifically diving into spaces and what those spaces really mean. So just a brief background about myself here. My name is, again, Joe Labaya. Been in the industry since 2015 after going to school and getting my associates in drafting and design, and then moving on to project management at that point. And just some of my background includes working in an MEP firm, developing that MEP firm from CAD to Revit, starting in the low voltage department and really being a power user in that department, and lead drafter and running everything drafting. And then helping out other departments as they developed and as projects came through, where then I moved into the VDC side of the world as a VDC tech, and then moved into the VDC management before moving over here with ATG. So that's a brief history about myself. Just a little bit of a description of what we're kind of going through today. We're going to kind of go through more of an expedited process of creating spaces in a project setup prior to duplicating them. We'll also walk through adding tags and everything like that comes through with this as well. I do see some folks on here that have been through some training that I've done in the past, so I'm interested to kind of hear your perspective on doing some of this as well. So feel free to utilize that Q&A chat. And if you guys have any questions as well in your workflow, if you may have found other methods or workflows as well. So some learning objectives for this workflow. Definitely spaces are needed quite a bit in the MEP world. So unlike architecture and structure, they utilize more of the room tag aspect. We utilize spaces. And spaces, specifically with Revit being as integrated as it is with trying to do calculations and stuff like that in the design world, spaces give us the ability to give us a lot more information. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to drive efficiency with the space placement. That way we can start to utilize some of the automated opportunities that Revit has promised us over the years. We'll also be looking to leverage some analytical views within these spaces. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and those analytical views come with the MEP3. So we'll take a look into that. And then we'll also discover some ways that spaces can be leveraged by your organization. So especially if you're one of the newer companies out there with the transition, you're newer to Revit, you've been in AutoCAD for decades on end, this is something that can definitely help drive your workflow paired with a tool like the MEP3 and all of its content that comes with it, in order to help get an estimate of what's going on when you enclose your systems. and such in order to kind of validate what is happening within this system that Revit allows us to look at, and what traditionally would be done in spreadsheets and ductilators and stuff like that, and other analytical or third-party GBXML programs. All right, so let's now take a look at Revit. So I'm going to move us into Revit right now. Okay, so can everybody see my screen? All right, what you guys should be seeing is you should be seeing Revit 2019. Awesome, thank you, Justin. So what we're showing here is I've got my MEPP3 basically pulled up. So this is going to be my starter project. All right, and let me see if I can pull some of that basic information up here for you so I can identify where all that stuff comes from. All righty. Okay, so here's what you guys traditionally will receive for the MEPP3. So in the file folder. So where I started out in this case is I basically started out right in our starter project. So we've got a starter project. Okay. And then once I went in and found my starter project right here, basically just went in, started that project up new, basically did a save as, and saved it in my new project folder. In this case, the name of the project up here at the top, MEP process improvement using spaces and views in the MEP3. That's going to be the name that I created here. And then I also resynchronized as well. So once getting into that, then I went in and went through the process of adding in my background. So, and we know with the MEP3, we do not come in here and drop in a background through the insert tab. Traditionally, what we'll do is we will place over the placeholder here. So there's the difference of we're going to end up utilizing this option as opposed to how I set it up right here where I insert. But if you guys choose, you can go either which way. So that's all taken care of and embedded. And then just to make sure, before we do any type of spaces within the MEP3, we know whether it's MEP3 or just standard out of the box Revit, we have to select our background. We go into edit type, and specifically in edit type, what we're looking to accomplish is we need to make sure that under constraints, room bounding, we have this little box checked. Okay, that's what's going to allow us to pull that room and space information across from the architectural model. So it's a vital process to creating spaces here in Revit. So our next step in this case, being that we have this created, we have everything pinned down, we're in our project setup portion of our project browser here. Okay, so you can see I'm under project setup number 1. With us being set up here in the project browser, just while you're taking a look at this, just take a look at how the project browser is set up in the MEP3. Definitely a little bit different than traditional, especially if you're coming from a smaller firm that does a lot of work in between and kind of doing development on the fly. But now that we've got all this stuff in here, I'm gonna select to turn off my select links and select turn off my pinned elements right in the bottom right hand corner of Revit. And now I'm going to focus on creating those spaces. So my first location that I go to here in Ribbon is going to be going into my Analyze tab here in the ribbon. Okay. Once I go to my Analyze tab, I'm looking at my Spaces and Zones panel. And then as I look at my Spaces and Zones panel, you can see we've got several different options out here. So we've got an option for spaces, an option for space tags, space separators, and then we have a space naming tool. Okay, and these are the different buttons that come and play with this. Outside of spaces, there are zones. So that's a whole separate category that we can talk about at a later date. Also a great tool to utilize as well, especially mechanical and plumbing. Definitely helps out. But what I'm gonna go through right now is I'm gonna start with the space tab. So once I select the space tab, you can see now I've got some options out here. So I've got a space tag, and this is the name type and the name options that come with the MEPP3. Okay, so room name and number, room name, number, and area, metric volume, airflow, all kinds of different options. So that way you guys, especially if you're doing design, if you need to see some of that information in the early stages of developing your plans, you have access to that, and the tags already pre-built for you in such a way to where you don't actually have to go through and fight that battle of doing that stuff on the fly. It's already included in the build of the MEPP3, so you're set to go there. Also, you can see here we've got some upper limit options as well, depending on how high you need to take this. You can also set this to adjust horizontal, vertical, or there's a new model option out here. There is a leader option. So some of my guys, including what I used to do quite a bit, some of my guys who are doing like electrical or doing low voltage or just anything related to populating maybe a ceiling plan or a floor plan with more symbology, you can add those leaders so that way when you're working in your working views, you can kick your tags up a little bit, so that way you can still have a tag for that space and show that space information, but set it like up here to cover this space and not actually lose that information of what the room name and number and any of the area or anything like that you're going to have. So leaders can go a long way, especially when you're plumbing up a series of floor plans and rooms and so on and so forth. So now our next step, there is a tag on placement option here. So when we go to place, you can see my tag is showing up here in my crosshairs. But what I like to do to speed this process up is there's this place space automatic option. So I just select that button here, okay? And by selecting that, now you're gonna see 19 spaces have been created automatically. So instead of one by one selecting that, we can now select all spaces in this floor plan, okay? And if you're in a building that maybe has multiple stories, I know from training, we tend to utilize, I think it's a 3 or 4 story building. In that case, it speeds the process up tenfold, especially, I mean, you're talking about some of these buildings where you've got 200 or 300 spaces. That definitely helps floor by floor get that process done quite quickly, and then just less work for you to do on the back end. So we've got this option here. We've also, when you have a second floor, I'll go to the second level here. I'm going to come back up to my Analyze tab. So let's highlight that. Back up to the Analyze tab here on the ribbon. I'm also going to come back up to my Spaces and Zones panel, okay? And then I'm going to select space. All right, now that I selected space, go back through this process again. Place spaces automatically. All right, another 13 spaces have been created. All right, so that gets me my first level and my second level completed. Now that we've gone through, we can see we've got spaces out here, but if I select the space, it says unoccupied, unoccupied, and so on and so forth. Really not much information yet out here. Now to speed this process up, there is what's known as a space naming tab or space naming button on the ribbon here. So I'm going to select that space naming button. In that space naming button, there is an option here where we can look at names and numbers, okay? So what this is going to do is, we understand in architecture, they do room bounding at the beginning base of the project, where they're naming and identifying the rooms, okay? They're placing their tag, they're putting a boundary around it and everything like that. They utilize the room bounding options found under the architect tab. So what that's doing with that box being checked in the type properties, plus what they've done in their previous work, we're now able to pull that information with this tool in the spaces automatically, instead of having to key the names in, key the numbers in, and so on and so forth. It's just, it's time consuming to do all that. And then with all the additional options of, if you've got 200 spaces, you don't have to sit there and individually select all 200 spaces. So what we're going to do is, we're going to keep this names and numbers option radio button selected up here. And then down here at the bottom, so I'm going to highlight this, down here below under selection, we can do individual levels, or we can set this for all levels, all 32 spaces in this set of plans. Okay. So by doing that, what we'll do is we'll follow up with the OK button right down here. And then by doing that OK button, what we're going to see is going to happen is, we're going to start to pull that information across. And now all of a sudden, you can see we've got the Goblin House, LexCorp Tower, Monolith Base. We even got the Hall of Justice. So we've got some of these awesome names that come from the MEP. Thank you guys. And you can see all that information is sitting out here. And then once we click on the crosshairs, you can see all the information that comes across from this actual this space. All right, so this is where, once you get into your spaces, you can start answering some of these questions, such as space type, and maybe your construction type, down to your people, electrical loads, if it's a plenum space, occupiable, condition type, all kinds of information like that. So you got that luxury. You can see some of the other information that's out here, what works that some of that information may be on, so on and so forth, area, dimensions, all kinds of stuff like that. So that way you can get this information out and start pre-planning your space. Or if you have an engineer that kind of works offline, and you're working more as a drafter or light designer, you can kick all that information over to them. So that is getting started with utilizing the spaces. Okay, now for ceiling, so I'm going to go right into my construction docs for ceiling. This is where this swaps out a little bit differently. So I'm going to do overall building here just to get us tame. So in the ceiling plan, something that's a little bit different when it comes to spaces that we need to take care of is, naturally we're going to have ceiling plans. We can't just go back through and utilize the Analyze tab. Okay. So what I like to do, and what I train all my new guys to do, as well as when we're doing consulting and doing Revit Essentials training, what I do at that point is I go to the Annotate tab here on the ribbon. And then under the Annotate tab, we've got a function out here called Tag All. Okay. And under the Tag All, once we select Tag All, there's a little pop-up box that comes along. And we can just scroll down towards the bottom. We can see our space tags. Okay, so right here is our space tags. When we see our space tags, we just come in here, we check that box, make sure whatever we're looking for specifically in those series of ceiling plans, make sure that tag is selected so we can select one of these other tags if we choose to. And then we hit the OK button right down below, and that gives us the ability to apply those tags. So let's do that right now. And you're going to see, here we go. We've got Spawn's Alley. We've got the Baxter Building. We've even got our Hall of Justice. So this is how this process works in this case. If we go to the Analyze tab, and maybe we'll go to the second level for the ceiling plan, when we go to drop in our spaces, well, our spaces are already created. Utilizing the Analyze tab and going to create separate spaces again, that's where we run into an issue. So we don't want to do that because our spaces are already created, and we don't have to go through that process again. We can utilize the space tag, but then that allows us to just to individually tag, and that's time consuming as well. So by diving into the Annotate tab, coming to Tag All, rolling down to our spaces, then hitting OK, just time consuming. It just saves on time. So we reduce the time consuming effort, speed up our process a little bit, and we then, at that point, once our tags are created and our spaces are set up, we can start coming in here, setting up what we need to, and then going through some of our other analyze options. So creating our zones, going through heating and cooling loads, and so on and so forth. So those are what transpires in that case. Now, when it comes to utilizing some of the analytical views, there are analytical views out here. So you can see there are analytical views for duct flow. There are analytical views for friction loss and some of those other options. Those analytical views are here, and they're available in the MEPP3 and already built out with some of the schema information. Okay. And where spaces come into play is without those spaces created and without answering those questions for that space, it doesn't necessarily give us the ability to get a more accurate count of information in these analytical views. Okay, so I could show you some analytical views that are already more done up in this case. Let me go into a sample project. So this will be the same project, just a sample project that comes with the MEPP3. And let's go back into HVAC, take a look at flow. And this is where, by having those spaces created, we can start to actually see some of our flow information and some of that other information that kind of ties directly into that space. So as we enclose the system, as we understand the design of the space, we understand what we're looking at, we start to be able to see actual values, and those analytical views will light up for us and allow us to light up and see things. All right. So if you guys are, especially the newer companies that are coming into Revit, companies may have been established for many years, but they're newer to Revit. There is a lot of options out here with this. It is definitely more of an advanced way of looking at things, especially when you're talking about spaces and talking about going through some of these other project setup items, creating some of these systems for mechanical duct, for your mechanical piping, for your plumbing piping and stuff like that, utilizing equipment and such that actually is built and has calculations tying into it and so on and so forth and driving some of these values. This there's a lot that kind of goes into setting Revit up and getting Revit into what some of the promises have been over those years and continue to be over the years. So the MEPP3 and what CTC has created with almost a decade or just over a decade of time, what they've done with those 30,000+ hours of invested time into this pack, they've really helped for a small fee essentially get companies off the ground right away and not have to spend the years of putting this stuff together. Especially if you're same situation that I was. I've come from smaller firms where we're expected to produce a 95% productivity rate each month. So I mean, I've got 5% of my time that I can even attempt to look at developing. Everything else is on the fly, and I have to build that into projects. And if it's a heavier month for project loads and meeting those deliverables, that's just more work we essentially have to do on the fly, and it just gets a little bit more cumbersome and stuff like that. So this is a good solution to get you guys in the door, and then you develop from there, and you're already halfway there with a good chunk of your information. The way I like to describe this is when everybody came into AutoCAD years upon years ago, we didn't have layers, we didn't have blocks, we didn't have dim styles or textiles all created in profiles and everything like that. We had to develop all that. Well, we have to do the same thing in Revit. But when it comes to the MEPP3 and when it comes to utilizing the tools that are already built out here, such as having multiple space options readily available and having these different tags and so on and so forth, that just gets us that much further and gives us that much more time to move on to the next level of development, as opposed to still making up for the basics that we have to get up to just to get into our day-to-day. So that's kind of what I was going through. If you guys have any questions, definitely please feel free to ask some questions. I know this definitely seems basic from a project setup standpoint for some. And then I'm well aware that there are other folks out there who definitely have more questions and maybe have some alternative ways, maybe have some other options, or maybe just not getting into this right away. So definitely feel free to ask those questions. Just to kind of recap what we went through today, we just went through basic diving into spaces and placing them efficiently in both our floor plans and ceiling plans. We also went through and just leveraging the analytical views with those spaces and what those analytical views can become when you've got your spaces in place. And then just discussed a little bit about ways spaces can be leveraged by your organization. So leveraging it by your organization, what you're essentially able to do is once you have your spaces in place, you've got good families, you've also got good systems set up for mechanical and piping, and you connect everything together and you make sure your equipment is set up correctly and whatever formulas need to be in there are taken care of and it's reading out correct values. By having that information together, even if you've got engineers that are still skeptical and project managers that are still skeptical that Revit's producing an accurate value, you've still got something to leverage and say, yay or nay, it's off by this much, or it's exact on the dot. So it gives you that opportunity. And then also by having those spaces, the next big thing that you can do is the GBXML workflow, where you guys can take that. And if you're utilizing a third-party piece of software like Trace or Carrier Hap or something like that, having those spaces, exporting out, putting it through that process and bringing it back in, that gives you guys even more ability with some of your numbers. So outside of that, I definitely want to open it up to questions. And then Want to thank everybody for attending today. So just short and sweet, quick to the point. And feel free, if you're interested in the MEPP3, if you're interested in any of the other CTC tools that we have, if you're interested in training, or if you've got an excessive amount of project work for MEP, whether it's design, VDC, scan the model, or just basic project setup, give us a call, shoot us an email, visit our website. We're here to help in whatever way we possibly can. So thank you, everybody.